expertise, perhaps, but I know you've been studying a lot of the war situation. The U.S. mainly said we're going after Russia with sanctions. U.S. has, about 42 countries in the world on sanctions, and they're all working their ways around these sanctions. It's clear that Russia prepared for this. And we said the ruble was going to go through the floor. But what we're seeing now instead is the ruble is getting pretty strong. Countries are starting to trade with the ruble. It's becoming more of an international currency. The dollar is weakening. We're seeing inflation in the United States. We're being hurt by the wheat that both Ukraine and Russia had, as well as the lack of fuel. And more than us, Europe is in terrible situation. I have no idea what the hell they're doing in Europe, because German industry is one of the few Western countries that's still industrialized. Is going to die. It cannot function without the fuel that it's been getting, and yet they're still pushing ahead with this, I think, under the reins of the United States. So, and perhaps the outcome of this is the hegemony which the U.S. had in control of the World Bank and the IMF, and the dollar being the currency for trade, is being lost. And that hegemony is being challenged from the East, Russia and China. And it's clear that Russia and China have made deals, and we're talking while the U.S. was boycotting the Olympics, doing a boycott. They were there talking. I mean, it's almost foolish to think about what's happening. What's your thoughts on this? Are we going to end this war with a new economic reality throughout the world? And has this been a major mistake on the part of the United States and Europe, or where do you see this going?
I'll start here rather than going all the way back. I'll just go back to February 4th of this year. Okay, so that way we wrap up February 4th. What's important about February 4th is that Vladimir Putin traveled to Beijing, China, where he met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping to start the Winter Olympics. This is the one that the U.S. boycotted, the West boycotted, everybody boycotted. Strategic error on their part. Putin and Xi met, and their meeting produced a 5,000 plus word joint statement. And this joint statement was interesting on a number of fronts. Strategically, right off the bat, the big item that comes out of the joint statement is that Russia and China have agreed that the rules-based international order that the United States has been selling as the end-all. You hear it in every, even General Miley, who the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before the Senate, I believe, today or yesterday, and here's a military man talking about the need to defend the rules-based international order. What that is, in short, one word is American hegemony. That's two words, so that's Marine math for you. But American hegemony is what the rules-based international order is. It's how the United States dominates the world. It's the system we put in place at the end of the Second World War, not only to rebuild the world, but to control the world, control the world's economy. It promised not to do history, but George Kennan wrote something called the Long Telegram that was used as a document. He wrote it in, I think, 1948, 49, 46, maybe later, but in the 40s. And he said this is a document that became famous because it became the foundation of the American policy of containment that led to the creation of NATO and the Cold War. But Kennan wasn't writing about the military. Kennan was writing about the economy. He said that the Russians aren't buying into the American effort to impose a dollar-based economic control over the Soviet Union through the Marshall Plan and aid. The Russians rejected that. The Soviets rejected that. He said, by rejecting that, they're rejecting our control of the world scene. Therefore, we are going to be in perpetual conflict with the Soviets on economic issues. And he was right, because they're not going to surrender. They didn't surrender until 1990. Then they surrendered. We saw what happened to Russia once they surrendered. But my point is that the United States have been using this rules-based international order to control the world. not to help the world, to control the world to America's sole benefit. It's all about us, not about anybody else. If other people profit from it, great, but we don't care. We want it about us. And you see this with, the arrogance of Joe Biden, telling the German premier, the chancellor, you can't have a pipeline with Russia. You have to shut it down, even though it's going to destroy your economy because it's not good for us. What kind of hubris is that? It's the hubris that comes from thinking that you are the world's essential nation, that the world can't exist without you. But guess what? Russia and China can exist. And they reject this. And they formally said, there will be no more unilateral world. We will no longer recognize the United States as the singularity around which the world gravitates. It's now going to be a multipolar world, one that is a law-based international order, the law being the United Nations Charter, meaning Russia and China aren't trying to rewrite the system. They're embracing the system the world agreed upon in 1945. They're saying this will be it, but it's going to be a United Nations where we have multiple poles of influence, like the BRICS, Brazil, South Africa, India, Russia, China. Imagine that. Everybody is equal. Imagine that. and they also said, this concept of American economic hegemony that's linked to this transatlantic alliance. No, we're focused on a trans-Eurasian economic union that connects Russia with China through Central Asia and through India, Pakistan, inclusive of the Indo-Pacific region, reaching into Africa. Basically, 2/3 of the world's population is part of the Russian-Chinese economic union. Now, this is a statement, when I heard it, I sat up and went, this is one of the most fundamentally important documents in modern history, because it represents a complete revolution, a departure from the US dominance of the world. But the problem with a paper revolution is it's meaningless. It's hard to implement on its own. You need a push. And Russia and China weren't going to start the push on their own. The United States started the push. How? The United States has been sanctioning everybody for years, and they never work. But we had told Russia, if you remember, Biden had that summit with Putin in June of 2021 in Geneva. The one where he famously looked Putin in the eye and called him a soulless killer, and all this other tough talk. But the other thing he did is he looked Putin in the eye and said, if you invade Russia, we're going to hit you with the most massive sanctions you've ever seen. It's going to hurt you, man, or whatever, how Biden ever talks. But he's going to bring pain. The pain is going to be brought down. And Putin saw him and Putin heard. Well, yeah, Putin saw him, Putin heard. Putin went back to Moscow and said, hey, if we go into Ukraine, they're going to hit us with sanctions. What do we do about it? And they prepared. And one of the ways they prepared, and this is where the ignorance of the United States comes into play. Because of the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the American economic exploitation of Russia, Russia had become inexorably intertwined with the Western economy. About 20 to 25% of the Russian middle class is linked to the West economically, culturally, and you can't divorce that. If Putin ever said, I want to cut relations with the West, he'd be voted out of office because this group is a politically empowered group that isn't going to play ball. They want relations with the West. You have the oligarch class that, again, Yeltsin breathed life into. These are very corrupt people who stole the national wealth, made it their own, and enjoy monopolies. When Putin came to power, he said, I understand I can't shut you down because you control our economy. I'm going to let you stay in the economy, but you're out of politics. If you stick your nose into politics, I cut you off the knees. And he did. He took over Gazprom. He kicked or Lukoil, I think, and he kicked the oligarch out of the country. Several of them fled, but many of them there. A lot of people talk about, the ignorant people say Putin needs the oligarchs, that he's part of the corruption of the oligarchs. No, Putin hates the oligarchs. He just can't get rid of them because economically they're too ingrained. Well, What did Biden do? First of all, he broadcast what he was going to do. So Putin was able to get a plan. And then he did what he said he was going to do. Cut off the economic system, a complete economic divorce with Russia, between the West and Russia. He just did Putin a favor. Had Putin initiated that divorce, people would be in the streets rioting, he'd be out of office. But the United States initiated the divorce, and Putin went, thank you very much, we're done with you. We're finished. We are never again going to allow Western economy to be able to dictate to Russian national security interests. It's a divorce, full, final, and complete goodbye. And the Russian people are like, oh my God, but the West did it. You can't blame Putin. What else did we do? We seized all the assets of the oligarchs. Guess who don't have any money anymore? The oligarchs. And without money, you think they got power? Putin gave a speech a couple of weeks ago where he told them, get the hell out of Russia. He's talking to the oligarchs. Leave. You're not real Russians. You've been stealing from us. You've been living a life of luxury, and we no longer need you. We no longer want you. We did Putin the greatest favor he ever had. We've empowered him in a way that was unimaginable because he was trapped by the Western economy and the interlinking between Russia and the West. No longer. It's a divorce. And it's a divorce that's coming out in his favor. You remember how Biden bragged? I collapsed the ruble. As if that's something really cool to do. I collapsed the stock market. Just let's put on our humanitarian hat. That's a word we like to use. How would we feel as Americans if a foreign power on a whim decided to shut down our economy? We're all unemployed now. We don't have a paycheck, but we still have mortgages, so we're going to lose our homes. We have kids in college that can't go to college anymore because we don't have any money. We're going hungry. We're homeless, all because some idiot overseas decided he wanted to shut down our economy. Well, that's what we were doing to the Russians. So any American who sits there and says, no, we need to do that, really? We need to screw 139 million people like that? You would never tolerate it happening to you. That's what we were doing to the Russians. But fortunately for the people of Russia, Putin was told in advance what we were going to do. So he sat there and he said, really? You're gonna seize my sovereign wealth fund that's composed of euros and dollars in your banks that I use to pay off all my debt and make our economies interact? Thank you. Because what I'm going to do now is empower the ruble. You guys got a dollar that's worthless. It's based upon a debt-run economy, a petroleum dollar that we're going to rip away because the world's not going to be paying for petroleum dollars pretty soon. They're going to be using other currencies like, imagine, the ruble, which is now linked to the gold standard. Russia's been stockpiling gold for 20 years under Putin, and they got a whole bunch of it, and he just linked the ruble to gold. And guess what the ruble's doing today? Boom. It is more powerful now than it has been in a long time. We collapsed the Russian stock market, not on your life. Look at it, up 4, 5, 6, 8% per day. It's doing well. You know who's not doing well? Europe. Europe is hurting bad. Why? Because the United States promised things we couldn't deliver. We promised them that we will get them the oil, the coal, the gas they need. We had a plan B. Turns out we didn't have a plan B. We can't get them what they need. And if they cut themselves off from Russia, their economies literally shut down overnight. Not just temporarily. German economists are warning Chancellor Scholz that this could be a permanent damage to the German economy. It will never recover. This will be worse than the Second World War. And that's what's about to happen to Germany. That's what's about to happen to France. That's what's about to happen to all of Europe, except those countries that has said, yeah, we're going to play ball. Hungary ain't going to suffer because Hungary just agreed to buy all their energy in rubles, which is the other thing that Putin said. He said, you want to cut me off my sovereign wealth? Okay, I don't care about dollars and euros anymore. Get rid of them. I don't want them. I only care about one currency. That's the ruble. And if you want my gas, you got to pay me in rubles. It's a brilliant move. Putin has literally checkmated the West on their economic sanctions. Is there some belt tightening in Russia? Yeah. But right now, I guarantee you, if you go to a Russian supermarket, there ain't no empty shelves. Go to a German supermarket. Shelves are empty, man. They got nothing. And I don't mean to gloat because I have family that lives in Europe and all this, and I feel sorry for the civilians. But this is, I'll leave you with this. Most people who are watching this are old enough to remember the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. And he had an advisor named James Carville. And Clinton was running around talking about foreign policy and this and that, the other, save the world, all this. And Carville said, shut up, man. There's only one thing to get you elected. It's the economy, stupid. People vote their pocketbooks. And you want to talk about a path out of this predicament? Every single one of these European nations are ostensible democracies. And I can guarantee you that Scholz's political future is very short. If the German economy collapses, there will be an immediate vote of no confidence in the German parliament. He will be tossed out, and they will bring in a politician who will focus on, saving the German economy. And that means all this sanction nonsense is over. That means all this artificial propping up of a neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine is over. And Russia was planning on this. Right now, NATO's saying, hey, we're strong, we're more united than ever. No, you're not. You're not united when 4 NATO members disregard the sanctions and are buying gas in rubles. You're not united when Turkey blames this war on NATO, not on Russia. You're not united when Germany is going to be pulling out of this whole arrangement pretty soon. NATO is weak, and this is the Russian plan. The Russians have 2 major objectives now from this. One, after the Ukrainian victory, one is a new European security framework that respects the legitimate national security interests of Russia, that keeps NATO away from its borders. This is going to happen within the next 5 years because Europe cannot sustain this American vision of a strong NATO. How is Germany going to pay $100 billion to rebuild their military when their economy is in the dirt? Ain't going to happen. United States, General Walters, the commander of the U.S. forces in Europe, testified before Congress, and the Congress said, frying them out. We're giving you $839 billion, so you're going to send troops over to Europe, right? He said, no, we're going to wait until after Ukraine settles down. Why? Well, because this is a political problem. Who's going to invite us? Well, don't they want us there? Maybe not. And even if they do want it, who's going to pay for it? Because we're not paying for it. It costs over $2 billion a year to have pre-positioned equipment for 1 American brigade in Poland. And we're talking about sending over 8 brigades. That's $16 billion just to house them. Now you got to feed them. You got to train them and equip them. Who's going to pay for that? Because the American taxpayer ain't paying for that. Europe will have to underwrite it, and no European country can afford that. So this concept of NATO unity is a farce. Russia will impose, I believe, a new European security framework on Europe in the next 5 years. It could be very risky, though, because if Finland and Sweden decide to join NATO, that complicates things. But I have confidence that the Russians have a plan. Why? Because they said they have a plan, and Putin don't bluff. And then the other thing is the strategic shift away from American domination. The age of American hegemony is over. We're the Titanic. We've hit the iceberg. The iceberg is called Russia and Ukraine, and we are in a long, slow process of sinking. It's over. China right now has learned something. And their Chinese ambassador gave us a heads up. Before the Putin meeting, the Chinese ambassador spoke with NPR, and he said, relations with the U.S. and China are very bad. And if they don't change, if the U.S. continues to float around like it's a power, there will be a war with the United States. He said it right up front. There will be a war with the United States. And then they entered the special relationship with Russia. Russia entered the special relationship knowing that China's going to war in Taiwan and they're going to fight the United States, and Russia didn't walk away from that. Think about that for a second. And then Russia turned around and invaded Ukraine, and China isn't walking away from Russia. Sadly, something that's probably going to happen in the next 5 to 7 years is China's going to invade Taiwan. And there's not a darn thing the United States can do about it. The world has fundamentally changed. And here's the other truth. It didn't need to happen. This war in Ukraine did not need to happen. This could have been solved peacefully. Nobody needed to die. Nobody needed to die, but American hubris and American, the power, the greed for power started this war, and it's going to cost Taiwan. Taiwan doesn't need to be invaded by China, but they're going to be invaded by China. Hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese are going to die because the United States thinks it has a right to dictate outcomes to other nations. When the reality is, China right now would accept Taiwan to join China as it is. No fundamental changes. Keep the government, keep the economy, keep whatever you want. You will wake up the next morning and there will be no change except that you will be flying the Chinese the flag of mainland China, not the Taiwanese flag. You really want to die for a piece of cloth? one that the United States isn't going to back you up on. If Taiwan has learned anything, the United States is the worst friend in the world. Ask the Ukrainians how good of a friend we are. We're willing to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian, and we'll be willing to fight the Chinese to the last Taiwanese. That's the sad thing. And if you're anti-war, this has to be the biggest nightmare in the world, because we're seeing a major war in Europe that should have been avoided, and we're going to see a major war in the Pacific.